Walking. Seems pretty simple, right? Well, not quite. Walking is heavily controlled by the muscular system, and without it, our favorite pets wouldn't be able to do a whole lot. The muscular system is one of the largest organ systems in the body, and it is used pretty much all the time. The muscular system has both voluntary, such as skeletal muscle movement, and involuntary controls, such as the beating of a heart or the movement of the diaphragm. Today, we will be focusing on skeletal muscle. Let's take a closer look. A muscle is made up of many bundles of muscle fibers, aka muscle cells. The functional unit of a muscle fiber is the sarcomere. The sarcomere is made up of thick and thin filaments known as myosin and actin, respectively. The overlap of these filaments define how the muscle is functioning.
When at rest, there's a little bit of overlap between the myosin and actin. When the dog contracts its muscles to pull its leg up, the myosin and actin overlap significantly more, enough to pull the elastic elements of the muscle taut. When the muscle relaxes, the overlap of the myosin and actin decreases, and the limb is lowered. Do note this is for a specific muscle. Sometimes when a limb is moving, there are other muscles moving opposite each other. While one is contracting, the other must relax in order for the limb to move. And the actual movement of the limb is a series of different contractions and relaxations. But muscle contraction is even more complicated on the molecular level. The nervous and muscular system work closely together. Signals from the motor neurons dictate whether the muscle fibers contract or relax.
The action potential of the motor neuron results in the release of acetylcholine into the extracellular matrix between the terminal end of the neuron and the muscle fiber. The acetylcholine binds to ligand-gated channels embedded in the sarcolemma of the muscle fiber and allows the action potential from the neuron to be transferred into the muscle cell. This action potential travels down the muscle fiber where it reaches the calcium channel of the sarcoplasmic reticulum. This releases the calcium stored within it into the cytoplasm of the muscle cell. The calcium then binds to the troponin and tropomyosin that are attached to the actin. The binding of the calcium moves the troponin and tropomyosin to expose the myosin binding site on the actin, allowing the myosin and actin to bind once again. All of this happens when the sarcomere is moving.
Now, when there is no movement, the myosin and actin are in a state known as rigor, where they are bound and not moving. For the filaments to move, ATP needs to be supplied. ATP binds to the ATP binding site on the myosin head, and the myosin detaches from the actin. With the calcium present, the ATP breaks down into ADP and a phosphorus group. The myosin reattaches to the actin, but on an adjacent binding site. The myosin then releases the phosphorus group and moves the myosin over about 10 nanometers towards the center of the sarcomere. Then the ADP unbinds, leaving the myosin and actin in rigor once again. This whole cycle repeats as many times as long as calcium is still present. Once the calcium is gone, the contraction ends. In relaxation, the myosin heads just move away from the center of the sarcomere during the movement cycles. So now we've talked about normal, healthy contractions, but let's talk about when the muscle system acts abnormally.
This is Ramona Flowers, and she is experiencing a symptom known as myoclonus. Myoclonus is not necessarily a disease, but simply disordered muscle movement caused by a disease. It is characterized by jerk-like movement caused by a combination of involuntary muscle relaxation and/or contraction. Myoclonus is most commonly a symptom of canine distemper, a contagious neurological disease that leads to lesions and inflammation of the central nervous system, specifically the cerebellum in the brain and the cervical spinal cord. This leads to the signaling between the nervous system and the muscular system to be abnormal and often involuntary. Myoclonus itself may not be indicative of a disease, as some dogs experience it in the REM phase of sleep, or, like in Charles King Cavalier Spaniels, where it becomes prevalent in older dogs of the species.